All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. And today we're going to be talking about the 4 stages of competence, i.e. the 4 stages of learning, which is ignorance, awareness, learning, and mastery. But this one's a little bit special because I went and recorded a training for our alliance, which is my favorite place in the world. It's our community where we help people ethically build and scale their business while being in alignment, being in their heart, and doing it in a way that helps you sleep at night in the pillow. Head pillow, happy because it's in alignment. It's not transactional. It's not anything. And we have an entire group of people dedicated to supporting each other. And in this training, it's about a 20-minute training, and we're going to share it with you because this is a training that we released inside of our alliance. And we release these trainings quite often, as well as I do a video training once a week on what we can focus on, what we can do to move the needle, because we believe that rising tides rise all ships. And so here's the thing. I think this one is best on video. So if you're listening to this podcast on Spotify, you know the video is there. If you're watching it anywhere else, you might want to find the video because I share the model with you on the video so that you can see it, which will help you visualize these stages and realize how close we are to being able to achieve the goals that we want, but how we get stuck because we try to skip some stages of this model or process. And so I break down these 4 stages of competence and I give examples tangibly of how these apply everywhere, whether it's your life, your business, your family, your fitness, or anything in between, on the steps to follow by knowing where you are in the process to be able to make the changes. And in this, you're also going to hear me reference some models. You're going to hear me reference the Sacred Lightkeeper Quadrants, the Wedge of Expectations, and the SOS model, which are models that we use and help people within the alliance to be able to execute their vision, scale their business, increase their customer journey, change their habits, their relationships, or whatever else in between. But basically, there are 3 behavioral models that we teach people at length and in depth to be able to work through these stages of learning or competence and have a community that supports them. So I want to give you some context just in case when you're like, what is he talking about? Just as like, hey, Alliance fam, that's what this is. And so if you want to know more about it, if you want to come join us, it's literally $100 a month or $997 a year. And it is my mission to help at least 10,000 entrepreneurs come into this thing, be in alignment, be supported by everybody else, have people in their corner, be consistent, have a family to lean into, and one to ask for support when needed, and a family to give to, understanding that rising tides rise all ships. And so I just want to say thank you. And if you're still listening to this, I love you. And I love this podcast, and I love connecting with you. And so if you could also do me a favor, is after this episode, if you had a takeaway, if you had a question, if you had any gratitude, could you fill my love bucket and send it to me on Instagram? Maybe share the show with somebody that you know could benefit from this. We're over 500 episodes in, and this feels like one of my biggest crowning legacy achievements, which is this podcast. And all too often I forget to ask. I forget to ask for what fills my bucket or what needs, knowing that this is not a one-way conversation. It's a 2-way, and your feedback means the world to me. And so if you want any more info about the Alliance, just shoot us a DM on Instagram that says Alliance. And if you have any takeaways, any thoughts, anything that tickled from this episode, please send it to me. And if they want to do that too and send it to somebody you know who can benefit from it, it would mean the world to me. We don't run ads on the show. We're here to build a community. We're here to help each other. And the only way that happens is if you help me share it, because I'm only one and you are many. And so with all that being said, I'm going to stop bumping my guns in the intro because this one's been long enough. But without further ado, let's get into the 4 stages of competence, also known as the 4 stages of learning. And this is one of the trainings that we have inside the Alliance. So enjoy. I love you. And I can't wait to hear your feedback. All right, Alliance fam, welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about the 4 stages of competence. And this has been on my list to teach for a hot minute, but really, what are the 4 stages of competence? It really boils down to how we learn new skills. And these were developed, and I have my notes over here to make sure that I give them full credit, by a management coach in 1960s called Martin Broadwell, right? But in the world of life or business or skills, we tend to try to skip the process. We tend to allow our brains to think that we can do more than we think we can, or we find something that we want to accomplish, whether we want to learn a new skill in business like copywriting or video creation or podcasting or closing, or even in our personal life, right? Like changing our habits as a runner, going to the gym more, changing our diet. And we go in the traditional world, myself included, from like, oh my God, I'm completely unhappy. I noticed I don't like this and I want to be like this. And then we try to skip the process to master it, always leading to frustration. And I found this incredible write-up last year that I've saved in my notes. But the way that they frame this is like, would you be able to fly a plane without any training, right? If you just sat down in a cockpit, like you were on a flight, you've been flying your whole life, you've been in business class, coach, whatever, you've been on airplanes, you've been around them all the time, and all of a sudden there's an emergency. Would you be able to walk into that cockpit and fly that plane? And the answer is potentially no. And even if you were a Cessna pilot or had some experience, the answer would be no. And this coach breaks this down into 4 stages that I use and I've used to change every habit and behavior in my life. Now, it doesn't mean you wouldn't have a desire to. I want to land the plane. I want to fly the plane. I want to get everybody home safely, right? But we tend to operate in this ignorance unintentionally, overcompensating for what we think we can do, while undercompensating for the simple pieces or habits or behaviors that will allow us to get there. Right. And so the way that he's broken this down is absolutely incredible. And I'm going to pop this up on my screen too, because it's a beautiful visual. And I teach this to every single one of my one-on-one clients. I teach this to all my private clients and people everywhere. And it tends to change the game. And this model is built in a hierarchy, right? So the 4 stages of learning, or the 4 stages of competence, are broken down into 4 buckets. On the very bottom of the pyramid, you have what's called unconscious incompetence. And really what that boils down to is that because we don't have an awareness of something, we're going to have the wrong intuition. The word that they use, that I use, is ignorance. And not ignorance in the lens of I mean, or I'm pretending I don't know, but ignorance in the lens of like, I've never done that before. I don't have an awareness of that. The second stage, above unconscious incompetence, is conscious incompetence, which means we've had the awareness, but now we move into I'm aware that I don't know how to do this, but we tend to make the wrong analysis. And so stage 2 is awareness. Then we move into stage 3. Stage 3 is what we call conscious competence. And conscious competence is the learning stage. And this is where we label it right analysis. And then the 4th stage is called unconscious competence. And this is where we start to make the right intuition because we've mastered the skill. So if you're looking at this pyramid in front of me, or you've ever seen this before, these are the 4 stages that every single one of us as a human being goes through whenever we're trying to learn something new, change a habit or behavior, or start something that we've never done before. So before we can start, we have to become aware that we want to change something. That is unconscious incompetence. We have to become aware. So we're ignorant to it in the beginning. So at that bottom, ignorance is unconscious incompetence. A minute ago, I said it awareness. It's actually in incompetence. The moment we see like, oh my God, I didn't know that I could make a video like that for my podcast. We saw somebody do it and we were ignorant that we could do that. Or I didn't know that I could simplify that process and deliver that to my clients that way. Before we see that, we're ignorant to it. We didn't have an awareness. We didn't know. So once we see a possibility, once we see a solution, once we see an idea that we want to change, we go from ignorance, which is unconscious incompetence, to awareness, which is conscious incompetence. And what that really means is now I'm aware that I want to change something, but I'm lacking the habits, the skills, or the knowledge and behaviors to be able to start learning. And so we go from ignorance to awareness. And once we're in awareness, then we start asking ourselves, what would I need to do? What would I need to change? What would I need to try to learn? And so conscious competence is us in the process of learning, meaning, hey, I've never run before, but I want to be a runner in the future. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my calendar and I'm going to schedule 3 15-minute walks a day and 2 1-mile runs once a week. And I'm going to commit to practicing these things so that I can be in the learning phase of becoming a runner. And once we start the actions, we live in the conscious competence phase or the learning phase until we follow those habits and behaviors consistently enough that it changes our identity. And then once it changes our identity, then we become unconsciously competent, which means we have mastered that habit and behavior. And if we were to sit down a year in the future, and I'll just keep using running as an example, and look backwards a year, we'll realize how many things changed. But now what we're noticing is that we don't have to put it in our calendar. We don't have to think about it. It's just who we are. Parents deal with this and live with this and learn through this all the time. We learn through this with entrepreneurship all the time with different habits and behaviors. So for me, for example, I don't know, I've done 500 plus podcast episodes now. And I've been on over 10,000 podcasts. And I remember the days where I would be so nervous. Like, what am I going to talk about on this podcast? Like, what are they going to interview me? What am I going to say if they answer this question? How am I going to share? But now one of my favorite things is just throwing me in a chair with no prep whatsoever and being like, let's go. And that's because I've practiced it so much. Or I remember when I was 100 pounds heavier 2 years ago, and I had traveled this roller coaster over and over of my weight. And the reason I had done that is because I would be ignorant to the fact. I pretended I didn't know what to do, right? I was like, oh, I don't know how to eat. I used to convince myself my body was just going to stay this way. I'm never going to lose the weight and be under 200 pounds again. And so then what I started to do is I went from that ignorance to, well, I already know how to do it. And so I'll just do X, Y, and Z, but never consistently. So I tried to skip the two middle parts of this pyramid, which is what kept me stuck. When in actuality, the thing that really, really shifted it was consistency for me. And so I became very aware that all the choices I'd made in the past weren't working. The intensity, the working out at 4 a.m., going twice a day, I was overtraining, I didn't have a goal. And so then I started to change things. And once I got really honest with the fact that I wasn't happy, I didn't feel healthy, I didn't feel like I was the best example for my son, I followed this pyramid perfectly with the models that I share with you in the Alliance, right? And so this is where I asked myself, what's my vision? Now that I'm ignorant, that I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to be this way, where do I begin? And that led me to awareness. And in that awareness phase, I started looking, I looked backwards and I was like, what did I do that worked? Like, what were the things that I did? And what were the actions, behaviors, and thinking patterns I had when I was the healthiest? And then I was like, what didn't work? And I was like, well, this didn't work. Being restrictive didn't work. Trying to be really rigid about my habits and behaviors didn't work. And I made some adjustments and then I made a plan. And so once I had the awareness, I made a plan. I moved into that learning phase. And when I moved into that learning phase, I practiced consistency instead of intensity. And so in the Alliance, this is where I created those behavioral models, where I created the Sacred Lightkeeper Quadrants, which is where I took those new habits and behaviors that belong in the conscious competence phase or the learning phase, and I plugged them in. And I said, okay, for my body, I'm going to do this. For my faith, I'm going to do this. For my mindset, I'm going to do this. For my food, I'm going to do this. And then for all the areas where I didn't have an awareness, like I didn't understand how to do my macros for food or how much protein I should be eating, I found somebody that I trusted and knew, and they helped guide me. And so then I plugged that information in and I made a plan. And that plan was the first plan that I'd ever followed in my whole life. And it's the reason I'm now in the best shape of my life and the healthiest I've been at 40. And so I followed that plan. And I had that plan written down in front of me. I had it on my phone. I had it on a piece of paper. I had it everywhere. And as I was following that plan, my body was learning, my brain was learning, and I was reprogramming my beliefs and behaviors to achieve the goal that I wanted to achieve, which was to be able to do backflips when I'm 80 with my son. Same thing with this podcast, right? And so let me close that loop before I open that one. So then what ended up happening and how I live now is I don't have to put my workouts in my calendar. I don't have to sit down and plan my meals. I don't have to worry about where I go out to eat at restaurants. I've now practiced it enough and I've maintained this healthy weight for over 1.5 years now because I changed how I viewed it and I moved into that mastery phase. Mastery phase not meaning I'm done with it. Mastery phase meaning I have these awarenesses, and unless I change my goal, I know how to maintain this and keep going. I know how to order at a restaurant. I know how to eat that chocolate cake that I ate a whole lot of last night, and then adjust my behaviors over weeks and months to maintain my health and supporting myself and achieving my goals. The biggest mistake that I made for years is I tried to skip the phases. I'd be like, okay, I want to launch a podcast. Let's just launch it. And I would try to go really extreme and I would try to do it perfectly and I'd overplan. But I missed the baby steps. And I have found that the more we can recognize a plan or have a framework to be able to support the stages that we're going through, the more likely we are to achieve those things. And so in the process, I noticed that I was making some mistakes. I was lacking consistency. And so I took those behaviors and I put them in what we call the Sacred Lightkeeper Quadrants, which you have, which I break down into heart, mind, body, and business. You might change yours to faith, family, finances, fitness, and fun. Or you pick 3 to 4 areas that you want to work on. You then take that behavior of who you want to be when you go from ignorance, which is unconscious incompetence, to now awareness, which is conscious incompetence. You're like, I want to be different. I want to run my coaching calls different. I want to run my business different. I want to launch a podcast. I want to be consistent on social media. I want to change how I show up with my family. I want to create content more consistently. And once you have that awareness, you break it down into bite-sized steps and chunks, which moves you into the conscious competence phase. This is the learning phase. This is where you're going to start swinging the bat or taking the steps. And then when you're taking those steps, you keep taking them until it becomes a part of your identity. And then you become unconsciously incompetent, which is the mastery phase. And then it's who you are. And so even with this podcast that I have now that you listen to, and I know this is a training in the Alliance, but even in this Alliance, they started with small swings and bites consistently. And even with the podcast, I had to plan to do 3 episodes a week in the beginning, to then learn that we only wanted to do 2 episodes, and then continually practice that. So I take whatever behavior I want to change, or I take whatever goal that I want to achieve, knowing that I can only really change one thing at a time. And then I break it down to what I can do in that learning phase to be able to help me achieve it. So that's how the quadrants work. And then when we stack the other model, the wedge of expectations on it, I'm now setting myself up for success with consistency. I'm like, hey, on my best day, this is what I'm going to commit to. On my worst day, this is the minimum I can do protecting that progress so I can stay in that learning phase and keep working through these stages of learning. And so when I have those 2 things, I have a clear path of the goal I want to achieve. I want to launch a podcast, or I want to be consistent on social media every single day. And if I'm going to be consistent on social media, my ceiling might be, I'm going to record 1 video a day and post it on social. And my floor is, I'll post at least 1 text post to connect with my audience or share a thought. And then I will practice that consistency. And then that's where our third model comes in, which is the SOS. And that model is, what do I do if I'm not following the plan that I said I wanted? And that's why we have that model designed. It's to help you reset, refocus, or get support from your community, our community, or somebody in your life that can help you to get back to following that plan to move through these 4 stages. And so I have found personally that these stages helped me a ton to understand my own psychological learning process. And I can say ad nauseum, I don't even know if that's the right word, but I will say it, that all of the struggles that I had in my life were because I was trying to skip the stages. I'd go from ignorance to awareness, and then I would try to jump from awareness to mastery, and then I would get burnt out every single time. And then every time I got burnt out, I would come back to ignorance and be like, it doesn't work for me. I can't do it anymore. With writing, with videos, with sending video messages, with how I run Zoom calls. And it's because I was trying to skip the stages. And so this helps us understand how our brain works and how we go through learning to be able to accomplish our goals. And so these 4 stages of competence, or the 4 stages of learning, are not linear. They're just a big hodgepodge of like skills or habits or behaviors that we move back and forth in to be able to find our blind spots. And there are things that I'm really, really good at. And then in those things, I find myself with holes in other areas. And so we can be in entrepreneurship and find ourselves a master at one skill, and in the same lens, be completely ignorant of another supportive skill that would help us achieve a goal that we wanted to do. So the way that we want to bring this to the table is we want to understand these stages so that when we're current stating ourselves, when we're working on our goals, when we're looking at what we want to achieve, is we need to just identify what bucket we're in and then ask ourselves, what steps should we follow to achieve that next goal? And that's why I found this so empowering for me. And it doesn't matter if you have an analytical brain, if you have a global analyzing brain, if you're a big picture person or an every stone uncovered person. Really what these are diagnostic tools that help us find the areas where we get to be the best version of ourselves and make the most amount of improvements to achieve those goals. And so you can take these stages and you can apply them anywhere. You can apply them to your relationship. I know for me as a partner, there are things that I'm really good at as a partner, but I know that there are plenty of areas where I lack. One of them was physical touch for a long time. Another one was consistency. I would tend to over attack in a relationship in the beginning, friendships, business partnerships, intimate relationships. And I would like sprint in the beginning, but then it would slow down and I would be inconsistent. And it's not that I wanted to be that way. It's just that was my body's natural default to where I've gone through these stages and I'm like, oh, look, I can be better there. I'm going to set some reminders in my calendar to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to make sure that I listen. I'm going to go out of my way to send a text message to them at least once a week to connect. And in the initial stages of relationships, I have to remind myself to do that. And now what ends up as a byproduct is that once that gets consistent, it starts to become how I think and how I operate in that relationship, just deepening my relationships, like with my best friend TJ, with Ashley, our incredible CEO, who you all know. It's just this constant awareness of where can I make adjustments to be the best version of myself. And I personally have found that when I have a model like this that can help me identify where in the stage I am, it gives me this massive level of empowerment to stop what I'm doing, to make a plan, and to move through the stages, knowing that on the other side of it, I become a master or I become unconsciously competent in that bucket. And then I get to move on to the next skill. And so I wanted to share this with you again. And I'm going to throw the thing back up on the screen one more time, just as a reiterative and a reminder, because the way that we work through this thing is from the bottom to the top. And so you might find yourself with an awareness right now watching this that you're like, holy moly, I'm aware of all these things that I want to change, but I'm not taking any action to change them. And so you might be living in the conscious incompetence bucket, which is the awareness bucket. You might have heard this and realized that you've been ignorant about a skill or a behavior and recognize that you're in the unconscious incompetence bucket, which is the ignorance bucket on the bottom. You might be like, well, I've been being consistent with this, but it still feels hard, or I'm struggling, and you're learning, but you're not really excited about the goal, and you might have to adjust your habits and behaviors in that learning bucket. And then there's going to be some things that you look at and you're like, I'm a master. I've mastered that. And you're living unconsciously competent with some habits and behaviors. And what you can use this for is to identify whatever your goal is, whatever your vision is, whatever it is that you'd like to improve upon in your life, your business, your relationship, your friendships, your physical fitness, your sleep, your supplements, or any area that you think through. And these are the 4 stages that you're always going to follow. And then because you're in the alliance, you have the models to be able to execute this, because you take that awareness, you find the skills that you want to learn, and then you practice them consistently until they become who you are, which is mastery. And then you move on to the next skill, understanding that there's no finish lines in this game. And the only time it stops working is when we stop working it. And so this is about deepening our relationship with ourselves, deepening our skill set, mastering different skills in our business, which allows us to become the person to have that next phase of our business or that next phase of our life. And so those are the 4 stages of competence, also the way in which we learn. And so if you want to remember the big words, which I struggle with all the time and I mix them up, it's unconscious incompetence at the bottom, conscious incompetence, then conscious competence, then unconscious competence, which basically boils down to stage 1 is ignorance, stage 2 is awareness, stage 3 is learning, and stage 4 is mastery. And so when we're in the ignorance bucket, we'll have the wrong intuition. When we move into the awareness bucket, we'll have the wrong analysis of what to do or how to do it because we don't have that skill yet. When we're in the learning bucket, we have the right analysis, but have to follow the plan. And once we get to the mastery bucket, we have the right intuition because we've learned that skill and we know how to respond to that. And so that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. So I love you all to pieces. I cannot wait to read your comments to this. We'll make sure that we link all the notes and resources back to the models that can support you in this. And I cannot wait to see you start executing, moving through these stages. And so at minimum, please give me a 2-word check-in and let me know like how this landed for you, whatever bucket you're going to focus on. And I will see you guys in the Alliance. So much love. Mwah. Talk to you soon.